I'm here because I am very concerned about systemic racism in Virginia, and so I've joined others here to call for our governor to resign. There are many folks who believe that the best way for us to move forward with racial reconciliation is for Governor Northam to step aside. What happened 35 years ago in his yearbook is outrageous, but what we're actually more concerned about is existing systemic racism. One of the ways in which that's expressed most visibly is in environmental injustice, in the ways in which the two pipelines being constructed in our state, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the Mountain Valley Pipeline, are placed in ways that are clearly racist. Most visible is a compressor station at Union Hill in Buckingham County, just south of Charlottesville, a community of people who are descendants largely of enslaved people, and by placing the compressor station there, we believe that is a racist kind of action. Even the governor's own advisory council on environmental racism believes the same thing, and we're most concerned in seeing that compressor station gone. We think that if anyone believes moving forward with racial reconciliation is important, what that looks like is taking definitive steps and not simply expressing a commitment to racial reconciliation. One of the things that can look, one of the ways that can look is for the pipelines to be not built, for the compressor station to be removed, and for the governor or his successor, and we hope that's the case, will stand with Union Hill.
We have been going through some turmoil. Virginia is quite literally on fire right now, and the whole world is watching. I don't know if y'all know this, but over 25,000 articles have been written about Virginia in the past 2 weeks. The whole world is watching for what Virginians, what people are going to do to stand up right now. Make some noise for that. So we're here because we're tired. We're here because our elected leadership is not doing right by people and has not been doing right by people. This is not news. This is not news that there's systematic racism in Virginia. There's not news that environmental degradation is going down with the Mountain Valley and Atlantic Coast pipelines. It is not news that white supremacists walk the halls of the General Assembly and the Capitol building. These are folks who should not represent us, who do not represent our values, and we're calling for resignation. We're calling for a staggered, strategic resignation of Ralph Northam, of Justin Fairfax, of Mark Herring, and of Tommy Norman. These are all folks who have been complicit in white supremacy, in racism, in sexism, and misogyny. And we've had it no more. Make some noise for that. So I want to have a handful of folks come up and speak to why this resignation is so important and what's going on in Virginia. First, we've got Professor Travis William, a well-known sociologist who's been working on the ground and connecting folks in Buckingham County and Union Hill. Y'all make some noise.
Hey, how's it going? All right, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Union Hill, environmental racism, and Governor Northam's role in the environmental racism that's going on in Union Hill. So just to start off, Union Hill is, it's basically in the center of Virginia. It's maybe like an hour and a half from here. It's a historic black freedmen community. It was founded by emancipated slaves, but Buckingham is also important in general for black history in Virginia, because even if we go back to as 1860, before the Civil War had even ended, thousands and thousands of acres of land were owned by free blacks in Buckingham. Now, currently, Union Hill is slated to be the recipient of a very toxic 57,000 plus horsepower industrial natural gas compressor station. This compressor station has been actively opposed by many people in Union Hill and allies of those people as well. And it's part of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which is one of the two very unnecessary pipelines that Dominion is pushing through Virginia with Ralph Northam's blessing. Throughout this entire process of this compressor station, the democratic process has been completely undermined. And let me just tell you about the actual parcel of land that the compressor station is slated to be on. This land was sold to Dominion by a land company that's actually owned by the descendants of a plantation owner, a white plantation owner. The descendants of this plantation owner sold this land to Dominion for about $2.5 million. It's about $37,000 an acre. This is 10 times as much as the land around it. Now, many of the descendants of the people who founded Union Hill still live in Union Hill. They are actually the most directly impacted community. So how does Ralph Northam fit in this? First, Ralph Northam's relationship with Dominion. That's one of the main ways that he fits in. But he's actually been more active than that. There's a few things that Ralph Northam has done to make this environmental racism possible. One of the things that he did was that he completely dismissed the recommendations of the Virginia EJ Advisory Council to the governor. They actually recommended that both the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Atlantic Coast Pipeline be stopped until an actual EJ review could be done. And I want to say a little bit about environmental justice and environmental racism. So environmental justice, which is largely connected to environmental racism, that whole movement really gets started in the early 1980s. And what is involved in that? This involves an African American community in rural North Carolina who's resisting a hazardous waste facility that's been imposed upon them. There are people from the NAACP that get involved, some civil rights leaders get involved. Reverend Benjamin Chavez coins this term environmental racism. That has two dimensions to it. The first part of it is that it refers to disproportionate impact on minority communities in terms of environmental hazards, toxic waste, industrial facilities, things like that. That's the first part of it. The second part is the lack of people of color in environmental decision making. And I also want to point out that in the case of Union Hill, so we've heard about the really asinine blackface, the Jim Crow imagery that Northam's been directly connected to. But when we think about racism, especially when we think about things like environmental racism, we don't just need to think about the projection of ridicule and bigotry, etc., onto racialized people, communities, bodies. We also have to think about very violent negation, erasure, dehumanization, devaluing. That's what's been going on in Union Hill. Throughout this entire process, this historic black community has not only been violated, but it really hasn't even been acknowledged. And Northam has been a major enabler of this. One of the things that he did was on the air board, one of the final permits for this facility was an air pollution permit. And there were two members on the Virginia Air Board, which is connected to the Virginia DEQ, that had actually expressed concern about environmental racism and environmental justice in terms of the disproportionate impact of this facility on the African American community of Union Hill. And Northam actually removed those two people who had spoken out. He actually removed them. And they went forward with the decision and ended up getting the compressor station approved. So that's what's going on in Union Hill. There's also an event tomorrow with Reverend William Barber and Al Gore. They're coming to Union Hill tomorrow from 6 to 8 p.m. at Buckingham Middle School. But again, what I want to underline is that in addition to the blackface, the KKK, all the Jim Crow imagery, we also have to think about the everyday structural ways that people of color, especially black people in this state, are dehumanized and devalued on a regular basis. And again, it's not just about projecting bigotry and ridicule, it's also about violent erasure, the refusal to recognize the presence of black people, black contributions. This can happen in organizations, institutions, historical narratives, and it's happening in Union Hill right now. And they've been resisting very, very hard. There's an amazing, beautiful community that's come together around this issue. And they've been fighting very, very hard against really, really difficult circumstances. And I also want to underline again the relationship that Ralph Northam has with Dominion, because that's really what's driving a lot of this environmental racism, is the fact that he's working hand in hand basically with Dominion, him along with David Paler, who's head of the DEQ, who also is very, very cozy with Dominion as well. So we're really dealing with an entire power structure here that has racist implications, it has classist implications, but again, a lot of it is about violent erasure in addition to the projection of ridicule, the blackface, the Jim Crow imagery. We also have to recognize how black people, black communities are erased and devalued and dehumanized, and recognize that as a form of violence. It's not just something that's passive. People's lives are at stake. This compressor station is incredibly polluting, and the air, the actual atmosphere up there is really amazing, and really in a really kind of sick and twisted way. One of the reasons that Dominion has gotten this permit, which allows them to pollute tons and literally tons of very toxic substances, is because of how clean it is up there. So they can really pollute a lot, according to them, before they end up violating legal statutes. But anyways, definitely keep Union Hill as part of this the whole spirit of this event, and just be aware that people have been calling out Ralph Northam for his racism prior to this kind of foot in the mouth moment with the blackface and KKK imagery. So I just wanted to say a little bit about Union Hill. I support all the folks there. I encourage everyone to go and become involved in that struggle in Union Hill, and really learn about the pipelines, learn about the ACP, learn about the Mountain Valley Pipeline. There's all sorts of incredible struggles going on around that as well. And really don't let this stuff go on like right under your nose. This state really there's a lot at stake right here. And companies like Dominion and people who are wedded to them are really willing to sacrifice everything. You might think you're safe because it's not right here affecting you directly. You feel like it's not. But this is really a moment to stand up against racism, and also to really reclaim what kind of Virginia do we actually want. Because it's important how we construct the narrative around this. Because if you see, there's all sorts of stuff going on at the national level with narratives around Ralph Northam and how he's got all this support, etc. But you can see for yourself that people who are out here, you're out here because you care and because you're not okay with what's going on. So that's about it. That's all I really have to say. But thank you all so much for coming, and please keep Union Hill in your hearts.
We stand with Union Hill. So it's going to be a quick call and response. We stand with Union Hill. We stand with Union Hill. We stand with Union Hill.
We stand with Union Hill. We stand with Union Hill. We stand with Union Hill. We stand with Union Hill.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's one of the chants we're going to be naming as we march today. We have one more speaker come up. Mr. Jafari, who is holding down Black Lives Matter work. And so just so we know, this coalition that we formed, it is multiracial, multi-generational, across race, across gender, across folks. So we're going to have Jafari come and speak around how the Democratic Party uses black voters, and takes advantage of our voices. Come on up.
How's everybody doing this morning? Thank y'all for coming out and standing for what you feel is right. I particularly want to thank all the African American and black queens that have been putting this on their back for over 400 years. I would like to, which often goes unannounced, I would like to thank all the non-African Americans that stand up to help us for this cause, because people too often think that we're divided. There's images like this that we've seen in the 60s and the 50s where it was black and it was white, it was gay and it was straight, there was everything in between coming together for a united front. And that is very important for the next generation moving forward. They need to see images like this. They're going to be able to look up and say, hey, my mommy, my daddy fought for what was right and did it when it was their time. Particularly what I came here to speak about is how the Democratic Party has no issue coming in and swooping down and trying to get votes from the African American community, and then once they are elected, they don't come back and show face again. We were personally used by Tom Perriello and the Democrats down in the 757. They came down, they had the Associated Press and all that come in your face, but once they are elected or not elected, pretty much all that effort goes to the wayside. They do everything in their power to raise funds when it's election time. They raise millions and billions of dollars to go forth and be elected, but how come they can't use that same energy to help the infrastructure of the African American community? How come they can't use that same infrastructure to help the Boys and Girls Club that are drowning? How come they can't use that same infrastructure to help the mentors? Sometimes it only takes $100, $200, $300 to help these programs, but there's never any funds for it. Why is that always? But when it's election season, there's all the money in the world. And then people keep saying, well, if Ralph Northam resigns, and if Justin Fairfax resigns, and if Mark Herring resigns, then we're going to put the power in the power of Republicans. No. I can show everybody right now exactly where the power can go. If everybody can do me one favor real quick and put one finger in the air and say, I am the change today.
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 And just like that, the world can be changed. You can be the change. You can be the change. You can be the change. We can be the next elected officials to make sure that our children are able to come in a united community. Our children have what they need, food-wise, clothes-wise, infrastructure-wise, teaching them how to run a successful business as opposed to depending on a job in order just to get by. It's time for Martin's dream to fully come into fruition. Martin had a dream, but with BLM 757, it stands for Be Like Malcolm, Be Like Martin. Change may take 7 days, 5 years, or 7 centuries, but change will come. Sometimes you need to be out here and be a Malcolm. Sometimes you need to be out here and be a Martin. Both are very necessary in a time for change, and you all are where the change begins. So once again, I'd like to thank Rebecca for doing this, and thank all the kings and queens that are united in front of this. And let's continue to go forth, because you can swat one fly, but you can't swarm a swarm. So let's swarm down on this mansion and tell him we got to get up out of here.
No governor at all. No pipeline, no wall. 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 No pipeline, no wall. No governor at all. 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 No pipeline.
I say resign. 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 I say resign. Y'all say now. Resign. I say resign. Y'all say now. Resign. Resign. Y'all say now. Resign. Resign. Y'all say resign.
the Capitol when other groups are allowed to come on? You're unlocking. Sorry, you're unlocking this now. Have we done anything to warrant us being blocked off from the property? Because I've seen many other groups already here. The public's here. We want a resignation. With the signs on the Where's the language that says we need a permit to be on the premises? You have it? Okay, then how do I know you're not lying to us? We want a resignation! We want a resignation! Why we're being blocked off from the premises. We want a resignation! Really? Because I've seen we want a resignation! We want a resignation! What is the process? Because nobody informed anybody. We want a resignation! We want a resignation! So I would love to see want a resignation! We want a resignation! We want a resignation! We want a resignation! We want a resignation! You guys are gonna hold firm on this one. We want a resignation! 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 We want a resignation!
Fuck Dominion! Fuck Ralph Northam! Fuck Dominion! Fuck the police! Fuck Dominion! Fuck Ralph Northam! 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 Fuck the Capitol Police! Fuck Ralph Northam! Fuck Dominion! Fuck Ralph
Why is the market closed? Yeah, why is that closed? The hours are right there. I don't know what's the
So this is pretty much a clear demonstration that the people's voices can't be heard. We voted these individuals into office, that we pay our tax dollars this tax season. A lot of us will have to pay taxes this year, and this is a clear demonstration that they do not care about the voices of the people. They're saying, hey, you can protest, but do it over there, even though we paid and elected these individuals to be here. They're literally using our taxpaying dollars. They're literally using our voices to shut us out. So this is the time where I say, like I said when we first began, I am the change today. We have to take forward where we can't have this. Where is any politician saying, hey, we stand with you, the people? Where is any politician saying, hey, we came to campaign in your area. The least we can do is let your voices be heard on President's Day, on the day off. So we're literally being shut out by our own powers. This is not democracy. This is not what we signed up for. This is why the people are upset.
No cops, no KKK, no fascist RBA. No cops, no KKK, no fascist RBA. No cops,
and get those reparations from all the times Ralph Northam and his racist colleagues felt that it was all right for the EVMS to have their blackface, even if it was just a smudge, because everybody knows it's hard to get a little shoe polish off your face, because everybody here put shoe polish on your face before, right?
Yep.
No! It's just an everyday thing, just put shoe polish on your face, isn't it?
No.
The whole entire EVMS needs to be under fire as well. How do you allow that in your yearbook? How do you think that you should stand in here? You cancel your whole Black History Month party, and then won't even let the people come in and hear your voice. We need what? Liberation.